Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James, and welcome back to our Unity RPG tutorial series. Now, in the last episode, we looked at loading new scenes when we walk into new areas. Oh god, our player is still going to the wrong place. That's one of the things we're going to fix in this episode. He's going to the wrong place, and also, when we teleport back to the real world, we're ending up with two players out here, and that's no use to us. Let's go back through again. And then, oh god, we're taking two in here. And we've got three players. That's no use to anybody. So we obviously don't want that to happen. So we need to stop the player being duplicated, and we also need the player to go into the right place when you load into the world. So first thing we're going to do is stop the player being duplicated. So we're going to go back into our player controller script. So we're going to open that up here. And so last time we added this function, don't destroy on load, which will stop it being destroyed when you load between areas. But the problem is, when we go back to the first area, the player is already there in the world. So what we need to do is add an extra little check in here, so that when we first load into a new area, we find out, we just basically have a check to see if a player has already been created, and if it has, then we don't want to do anything. So what we will do is we're going to create a bool. We're going to create a private bool. Actually, we'll make it public. No, we'll leave it private. Sorry, we'll leave a private bool. Player exists, and this is what we're going to use to determine whether player exists. And as we know, as we covered before, a bool is just something that can either be true or false, and it's a checkbox. So we have a bool for the player existing. So what we want to say is, so by default, player exists will be false, because that every bool starts off as false. And by default, when no player is created in the world, we want it to be false. So we will say if not player exists, and you can just put a little exclamation mark before a bool when you're doing an if check like this. So basically what we say is, if we were to just say if player exists, what we'd be checking is if player exists is true, then we're going to run some code. But if we put an exclamation mark in front of it like that, we're saying if player exists is not true, then we're going to do a little bit of code that's inside these little brackets here. So we say if not player exists, then what we wanted to do immediately is tell the player, set the player exists to be equal to true, because now we know that the player exists because there's one being created right here, and we want to set the don't destroy on load. So we're going to copy that and paste it in there. Actually no, we need to delete that line. So basically what we're saying is, if the player doesn't already exist, we're going to set it to true so that the player exists. And we're going to tell it, okay, now that we know that one player exists, we're going to set this one to not destroy and load. But if not player exists, so this is what runs if not player exists is true. So if the player doesn't exist, but if the player does exist already, we want to say else, another pair of curly brackets, and we just want to say destroy game object, like that. Okay, so the logic behind this works as it stands right now, but it won't quite function the way we want it to, because if we have, so say our first player gets created, and that's fine, and it does this little thing, the player exists is not true, and then we set it to true, and we set it to not destroy and load. Then we go into the second area, everything's fine, but when we pop back into the first area again, this whole thing will be fine for the one we created, but for a new one that's being created as we go into the world, on that script by itself, that component, the player exists is false on his one as well. So there's no connection between the two. And the way we can create a connection is up here after private, if we say static. And basically what that means is, any object in the world that has the player controller script attached to it, all of them will use the same player exists bool. So in this way, when our guy first goes into the world, he has it, the value is false, and that's fine, and it goes here and it says the value to be true, and it says don't destroy and load. Then we go off to our second area, and that's fine, and we come back to our first area again, and this time when we come back to the first area, the player that was originally created, he's not starting, so he doesn't run through this again, so he's not going to get destroyed. But the new one that's just been created for the first time in this, as we go back to the original scene, the new one, he goes, okay, player exists, because we're checking the same player exists that exists across the world, we know it's already been set to true. So now that that player exists has been set to true, it goes, okay, we don't need to run this little bit, we're just going to destroy immediately the new player that's been created. So we should see, if we save this now and go back into Unity, we should see that we'll end up without having a duplicated player, basically. So if we hit play here now, and once it starts running and once it finishes compiling down here, it's a simple way to just deal with getting rid of duplicating things like that. And the thing is, this is only going to happen in this like first area of the game. So we pop back in here. There is only, as we can see here, there's only one player in the world, but our camera is still being duplicated, because remember, we're carrying the camera through the same scenes. So we're just going to do the exact same thing with the camera now, but I just wanted to demonstrate that the player now, there's only one player. It's just the problem is there's two cameras being created, and it kind of, Unity just decides which one should it decide is the active camera here, and the active camera isn't following the player. So that's fine. So now we need to go and do the exact same thing on our camera controller script. So we'll open that up over here. There we go. And we're just basically going to do the exact same thing as we did for player controller. So we're just going to copy this whole bit of code here and put it in the start function. But obviously we don't want to use player exists, so we're going to use private static bool camera exists and a semicolon, and we'll just replace player here with camera and player here with camera, and this should do the exact same thing. So now, ideally, assuming that everything's gone according to plan, our camera should follow exactly with the player, just the way we want it to. So once it finishes compiling, we'll hit play while it's compiling, and we should, like I said, we should see that the camera will nice and smoothly follow with the player, and we'll be all good and happy. So let's walk over to the first area, bam, like that. Okay, spawn in the nothingness there, and we'll go back, and there we go. The camera's following the player nicely, just the way we want it to. So that's perfect. So now we're no longer dealing with the problem of the player duplicating himself. And really, like I said, this could potentially only be an issue if you have a starting zone and your player returns to that zone. Completely another way to get around this without having to do any of that scripting would be to literally have maybe your first area of the game the player can't get back to. If the player can't get back to that first area of the game, then there's no issues. But at the same time, if you have any kind of save system in your game, whenever you load a new save, you have to be creating a player specifically, and there's all kinds of like different use cases when you're going to want to maybe use this system that we're using here. But like I said, it's very simple and straightforward anyway, so it's handy to know and handy to use. So as we can see, the camera is now following the player and following the only one player that exists, and that's perfect. So the next thing we need to do is sort out where the player, and by extension the camera, appears in the world. So what we're going to do is create a new script, and we're going to call this, create C#, we're going to call this player start point. So this is going to be the point in the map where the player will start from. And before we go and write any code, just on this level here, we're going to give, we're going to create a start point here. We can create, there we go. Create an empty here, and we're just going to call this start point, and we're going to add that script onto it. So we'll say player start point and pop that on there, and we're going to go into our other scene. Actually no, we should position this first, so it's there, and we'll position that kind of just outside the house, so when the player comes back out he'll go to here. And then we're going to open up our other scene. We'll just save this one and go into our house, and we're going to do the exact same thing here. Create an empty, call it the start point, give it the same script, and pop it down. Just say there, so when you walk into the house you're there, and you know that the loading zone to get back out is right here. Okay, so that's fine. We're just going to save that as well. So now we need to give this script some stuff to do, and it's going to be very straightforward what it's going to be doing. So actually we need to open it up, it'll be handy too. So our player start point, we're going to double click that and open it up in MonoDevelop here. And like I said, this is going to be very straightforward and simple. It's literally just going to be a simple script that will check the position, or check where the position of the player is and where the position of the camera is, and just say, no, actually it's not even going to check where they are. It's just going to check where itself is currently in the world and tell the camera and the player to go to the current position of the start point. So basically in our start function, we're going to need, no, it's not in our start function, sorry. We're going to need to know what the player is and what the camera is. So we'll do private player controller the player, because we know the player is going to be something that has the player controller script attached to it. And we're going to say private camera controller the camera, because again we know that the camera is going to be something that has the camera controller script attached to it. And then in our start function here, we're going to say the player equals find object of type, and then a sharp bracket, and player controller, and then a normal brackets and a semicolon. And I think we used that. We didn't use that in the camera controller, no? No, we didn't. Okay, we haven't used that before now. No, we've used that. You get component, but we haven't used find object. Okay, so find object of type basically does exactly what you would think it would do. It basically says, it just searches the game world at the moment and says find an object that has the player controller, a script of type player controller attached to it. So there's only one object in our world that will have that script attached to it, and that's our player. So that's how we know the player that we're going to be talking about in this script is the player within the world in general, because we need to assign that specific one, or else it won't know which one we're talking about. And then we want to move the position of the player to where our start point is. So we'll say the player, no, not the camera, the player dot transform dot position is equal to transform dot position. So what that's doing is saying, okay, the position of the player in the world, we want to make that equal to the exact same point as where our start point is in the world. And we want to do something very similar with the camera. So first of all, we need to find the camera. So we say the camera is equal to find object of type, and then a sharp bracket, and camera controller, and a normal brackets and a semicolon. And then we want to say the camera dot transform dot position is equal to, but this time we don't want to just say transform dot position, much like we did with the camera controller, where we had a target position of, we had an X target position and a Y target position, but we didn't want to change the Z position, or else you get weird you get the camera behaving weirdly and disappearing into the player and the whole world disappearing, and that's not what you want at all. So instead we say the camera dot transform dot position is equal to new vector tree bracket, and we will just say transform dot position dot x transform dot position dot y, and then importantly for the z value we want to make sure it's the camera dot transform dot position dot z. So we want to make sure we're getting the z value from the camera and not just from the normal transform, which would be whatever our player start point is attached to. So we'll just say we're going to save that, convert that if you need to, or if that message pops up you just hit convert, because all it is changing just how in my case Windows is reading the files, and that's fine. So we go back in here, wait for that to compile down here, and we'll actually load back into the main scene, and we should see when we walk between areas now, because we're a start point, we don't have to do anything else with our start points. All we need to do is have a point in the world that will act as a start point, and has this script attached, and we don't need to do anything else with that script. It'll automatically find a player in the camera and move them to the right place. So if we hit play here, so now our start point is making us start right here. We go into the world, there we go, we see our player starting in just the right position that we want him to. We walk back out and he appears back outside just like that. So like I said before, like I was thinking before, sorry, we have a case here where our start point is down here, but we actually kind of want the player to start out here and explore this little area and then go into the house. So what we can quite easily do here is actually we won't handle using multiple start points, because that's something that we can add later on in a more interesting way. Right now we'll just stick to just using a simple generic start point, but in the future we're going to look at having multiple entries, because if we have like a town or something like that, and that would have, I don't know, a whole bunch of buildings that you go into, then you're going to want to have a lot of different start points. So we want to create a system that can handle doing that stuff a little bit better. So we won't look at doing that now because it'll be a little bit more complicated. But for now, we just have a basic kind of start point system that will load us into a good position within the world. But one of the problems at the moment is, if we hit play here and go in again, so if we walk into there, it's fine. It looks sensible for him to walk into this room and he's walking upwards. But if we go back out, if we were to walk from the side, it looks kind of weird to load into a house with the player facing to the side. That doesn't really make any sense. So if that wouldn't be a problem for you, that's fine. You could leave it the way it is. But we'll add just one little line and one little variable to our script. So we'll go back to our player start point script, and we want to add here, we know that if we go back to our player controller, the way the player is facing is determined by this vector2 of last move, and our last move determines basically which way our player should be facing. And we set all that up with our animator and everything, so everything like that works nicely. So we know that if we want the player to face a certain way, then maybe we could use x and y values of 1 or -1 on the x and y to determine which way the player is facing. So we can say a public vector2 called let's say start direction, and we'll just go back to our player controller script, and at the moment our last move vector2 is private because we didn't want to make any changes to it at the time, but now we actually want to be able to set that last move from within the player start point script. And at the moment, if we were to go to do that here, if we were to say the player dot, what we would want to say is last move. That's what we want to be able to access. But you can see it immediately comes up as red because there's no way for you to be able to access that, because if we go over here, it's private, so you can't make any changes to it. So we're just going to change that to be public, like that. And if we go back over here now, oh no, actually no, we have to save that first. We'll save that, save it, there we go. Go back over here, and what we should see is if we just type it again, we should see, oh, it doesn't want, it should be working. Why is it not working? Why is it being silly? It could just be because I haven't gone back into Unity for us to adapt the file, but it will work for us. So we just say the player.last move. Okay, there you go. Now the red is gone now, just when I typed a bit more. So the player.last move will just be equal to our start direction. Hit our semicolon like that, and we're going to save. And then back in here. So by default, if you weren't worried about which direction the player should be facing when he comes out of an area, for example, we know that when we come back out of that house, if the collision was all set up properly, the only way for the player to come out of the house would be if he was facing down. He won't be able to face right or up or anything like that to go into the house. So we know that he's going to come out of this house and he's always going to be facing down. So we don't really need to worry about setting that direction here. So, and the default position of the player is facing down anyway, so we should be okay to just leave that at 0, 0. So if we go into our house in here, our start point, we know that if the player is going to be walking into a house, we always want them to be facing upwards. So our X will be 0, that's fine, but our Y value, instead of being 0, we'll set that to 1, and then by default the player should always kind of be facing upwards here. So we'll go back to our main scene, hit play, we pop up, and there we go. We see that the player's facing upwards like that, and we go back out, and the player's facing down. But if we walk in from the side, oh, the player's still facing up just the way we want them to. Walk in from the other side, the player's facing up exactly the way we want them to. So there you go. That's going to be it for this episode. We covered how to get the camera and the player no longer duplicating when we go back to the first area, and even more importantly, we covered how to get a basic start point system so that the player knows where you should be starting within a world, and we're not appearing out in the middle of the abyss, in the middle of nowhere where we don't want to be at all. So there you go. So thanks for watching this episode, and I will of course return with more Unity RPG goodness in the very near future. Goodbye. Thanks for checking out this episode, and if you want even more Games Plus James goodness, make sure you hit those subscribe and like buttons. You can also find me on Twitter and Facebook by following the links on screen, where you can find out all the latest news about the channel. And if you want to help support the show, check out the Patreon page, where you can get exclusive content in return for helping make the channel even better. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.